John McWhorter.
Barry Weiss.
Welcome to Honestly.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy you're here. So you are a linguist.
I try.
As people who have listened to you on this show, specifically our New Year's predictions episode, it's a highlight every year to know whether or not you know the latest lingo. But so you're a linguist, and you have just written a book about some of the shortest words in the English language. Words like I, you, he, she, namely
the little ones.
Pronouns.
That's right.
Why write a book about pronouns?
Well, pronouns have a way of attracting attention. There's something called Pronoun Trouble that I often think of, and that's why the book is called that. And that's because if you make a change in your pronouns, it tends to feel extremely dislocating. So there were people who didn't like it when we stopped using thou for singular you. It used to be thou was just you, Barry, and then you was you, Barry, and that guy who is hypothetically behind you. That would be you, so thou and you. Once people started using you in the singular, there were people who complained.
When was that?
That started especially in the 1600s and was largely complete by the end of the 1700s. And now here we are with, drum roll, the new way of using they. And I have seen people, often the sort of Uncle Vernon types, who will say, well, I'm just not going to do it. And that tends to be somebody of a certain maturity. And then there are people under 20 who are using it as fluently as you and I use I and me. And then there are the people in between. So there is something called pronoun trouble. And I thought somebody should write a book about it. And I could tell nobody else was going to. I got the feeling everybody's going to write about they, but all the pronouns, we is not very interesting, but all the pronouns are very interesting. And I thought there needed to be a digestible purple book that described them. Because I like purple.
Well, purple is sort of representative of your politics, I would say. I don't know if you feel that way.
That's true, but I also just it's a grapey kind of purple. You kind of want to drink it, like Welch's grape soda. So that's really why I chose it. They wanted it to be red, but that struck me as too aggressive.
Okay, John McWhorter, I hope everyone reads this book.
Me too.
They can, because it's short. And it's as
stocking stuffer.
Everything you write so snappily written, and there's just so many wonderful. Yeah, it's full of incredible words. For sure, the most talked about aspect of this book is going to be your argument, and I think this is counterintuitive for a lot of people who know your work, your argument in favor of they, them. Give us the elevator pitch. Why is they, them good, and why should it be here to stay?
If there is an argument that we should look beyond the gender binary, if that is a form of progress, if you feel that way, then we need a pronoun that corresponds to that sense that we're not going to specify he-ness and she-ness the way we used to. And if there's going to be a pronoun like that, you can't just make up a pronoun. I wish we could, but you can't. And so we're going to use they, because they has been used gender neutrally in sentences like, tell each student they can pick up their paper tomorrow. Forever. That's since Chaucer. So we've already been using it that way. Well, now we can just extend it somewhat. So that's why I like they, them. If we are no longer interested in getting past the gender binary, if that turns out to be something that doesn't hold on, then maybe we don't need a they, them. But as long as we do, I think they, them is handy. And it's just fun because it makes our language more like languages like Chinese that already have a gender neutral pronoun, but that's just me. Mainly, it's because it's progressive. And contrary to what some people think, there are progressive aspects of my politics.
Pronouns cause a deeply visceral reaction from people. They're so tiny, and they feel like they go off like nuclear bombs.
That's well put.
Why is that? What's at stake in pronouns?
They're not words. They are little screws. They're little nails. A word is walrus. A word is serendipity. I can't think of any normal words. But I, you, he, she, it, those aren't, technically, linguistically, they're words. But really what they are is they're little traffic cops. And so they keep our thoughts together. They refer in abbreviated style to something that you said all of once. So I had an accident. It was awful, but it taught me that what makes you stronger, what is that expression? What doesn't
kill you make you stronger.
I'm so bad at expressions. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I have a weakness with that. But that's what a pronoun is. And so it means that to change anything about a pronoun is like somebody telling you, don't use the middle finger on your left hand to do anything today. Always keep it tucked down. You're going to mess that up over and over because pronouns are your essence. They are grammar rather than words.
So in 2021, and we'll talk about this book later in the conversation, you write a book called Woke Racism. Sort of at the height of the woke movement, we'll talk about whether or not that's declined, you come out and say, not only is wokeness a bad thing, it is a form of racism, and we'll unpack that. Now it's 2025. Trump is president. And now John McWhorter is writing a book basically embracing they, them. Do you think that this book similarly represents a majority view or the view of a large segment that doesn't know how to articulate it or is scared to say it out loud?
You know, truth to tell, I think this book is going to irritate a lot of people about two things. One, the they, them, because there's a lot of resistance to that out there. And I think some people, thinking of me as the contrarian, which is almost a euphemism for conservative, they're waiting for me to say, stop with this they stuff. And then I say, oh, no, I like it. That frustrates people. Then there's also a whole other section that maybe we'll talk about, which is the idea that Billy and me went to the store, him and me went swimming, are not bad sentences. And the idea that there's something wrong with them is something that people in periwigs and breeches dying of yellow fever made up about 200 years ago. And now here we are living under the thrall of nonsense from another time. So that's going to irritate people. I have seen people actually seem to want to throttle me when I put that across. But contrarian me, and so that's pronoun trouble.
I want to start kind of at the beginning. When did pronouns become such a thing in popular culture? In other words, for me, and you'll tell me, I'm sure you have like the watershed moment for you. I remember the first time that I started seeing pronouns in people's bios. I think it was around like 2015, maybe 2016. I'm sure I was late to it, as I'm late to most things. It probably began in 2013, 2014 in universities. But
then,
when did it become such a thing? When did you start to notice it?
Sitting in my office at Columbia, I remember listening to some students who were sitting in a circle out in the hallway. And now that I think of it, I don't know why they were doing that. But they were out in the hallway sitting in a circle, and they were giving their pronouns. And I remember thinking, this is so peculiar that it must be a thing. There must be a reason behind this. And what it came in with was questioning the gender binary, which was happening on that campus at least at that same time. I remember.
Was it Columbia?
It was Columbia, and I remember there were male students wearing skirts here and there, and it wasn't just one person. And I remember thinking, okay, so this is a paradigm shift here. And it was around that exact time that students started giving their pronouns with people giving they. And I remember thinking, what an unusual use of they. But I guess that is part and parcel with this new ideology, which was fine with me. But yes, I believe that group of kids sitting in a circle, that would have been 2013. That's when I first noticed it.
Men have worn skirts before, many, many times. Throughout, meaning people gender bend a lot. That is not something that's unique to this moment. But are there historical precedents for playing with language the way that this movement, and we'll talk about what this movement is, has played with language and specifically pronouns?
Much less than you'd think. I'm sitting here trying to think of something along these lines. And what I keep coming back to is that when you see activism, even when you see gender play in the past, there's kind of a dog that doesn't bark. What's missing is the obsession with the words that you use as opposed to the thoughts that you're expressing. Now, certainly, gay men calling one another she, that would be an example of that kind of play. But that was only within a certain set, as opposed to something that was suggested as what all of society would do. I don't think gay men were insisting on being called she by outsiders. I'm pretty sure that wasn't going on. So what's going on now is new in that sense. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of these word lists, and I wouldn't say that they, them is one of them, but once you go too far beyond that, word lists of things that you're supposed to now say that you, or not say, coming either from the left or lately from the right, is a lazy kind of activism, because really what you should be doing is trying to change thought. But it's awfully easy to put a list of words on social media and then spray for violations. I think it's kind of a facile sort of politics, and pronouns can be pulled into that sometimes.
But isn't forcing or coercing people to have new norms on language a sort of backdoor way of getting them to change the way they think?
Everybody would hope so. And I think that there is an extent to which changing language can make people think in a certain way. To an extent, language and words and expressions can shape thought slightly. That's what psychology and psycholinguistics have shown again and again. But what we also see again and again is that if the thought processes are not held front and center, if the focus is not on making arguments and changing society, then whatever the associations were with the term you got rid of are going to come floating back down onto the concept. And so, for example, currently, I understand why people are saying unhoused, because homeless has certain unfortunate associations. But I'm also old enough to remember that homeless came in to replace bum. And homeless was the most humane, gentle way of expressing it. I remember thinking, this makes sense. I will say homeless. Now that's becoming a slur, and you say unhoused. I get it. It's so gentle. It's so humane. It'll last 15 years, and then we'll need something else. So really, you have to end homelessness, not calling people homeless. That sort of thing. But with they and them, it's not going to change attitudes completely, but it certainly opens you up to the idea that someone is neither a he nor a she. And I think we could have predicted that was coming sometime in the 21st century. And I figure as long as that's what's going on, I'd like to just go for the ride. But many people seem to feel differently.
Okay, we've touched on so many things already. Before we go deeper into the, Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, all the new ways that both political sides are weaponizing language, let's go to what I know will be the most controversial part of your book, which we've sort of mentioned, which is you, John McWhorter, like they, them, okay? And I believe that I was there when the idea for this book first got into your mind. I think it was, maybe I wasn't.
I hope you were. What was this?
Do you remember?
Yes.
We were at the Aspen Ideas Festival.
That's right. Yes.
Do you remember this? The one time that I went to the Aspen Ideas Festival.
The Jordan Peterson episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was on stage interviewing Jordan Peterson, which I did not realize that this was going to be, I was so naive at that point. I did not realize that interviewing Jordan Peterson was almost going to be like a heretic in the church of the high church of Aspen, where only liberal and progressive ideas are acceptable, or at least at that time. Who knows?
That was a loaded moment. Yeah.
It was a loaded moment. It was a huge room. And do you remember the question that you asked him?
That was such an unintentionally hot moment. I mean, the room was very focused on you two. It was not about me. Corby Kummer helped me get to the microphone. And I asked him, if these students want to be called they, then you're claiming, Jordan Peterson, that you can tell which ones of them really want to be called they and which ones of them are faking. And I asked, well, how do you know which ones are faking? And for some reason, he, as a very precise thinker, he did not give a real answer. And so I just said, it seems to me that it would be safer, and I forget how I actually put it, but it would probably be more civil to just call people they when they ask for it, because what does it hurt? And I had no idea that was going to get around the next morning. But was that when I was thinking, well, let's do a book about pronouns?
I don't know if that's when you thought of the book, but when I saw that you were doing a book about this, I thought back to that moment. And
that was fun.
To me, what happened in that exchange, I mean, it was happening so quickly and it was so heated in this room in an exciting way, frankly. But the thing that I take away from it, and the theme that the core tension that I see around this issue, is the tension between politeness, which is, to be crude about it, what I think you were advocating for in that exchange. What's the harm? Like, let go along with it. And reality. I don't remember, frankly, if the exchange was about use of they, them, or calling people that are biological women he, him. But the point still stands.
I think it was the former, but yeah.
Okay, but the point still stands, which is, I think what's at the deeper underlying issue that's at stake here is going along to be polite with either preferred pronouns or they, them, versus insisting on the assertion of reality, in this case, biological reality. So I think there's sort of two layers of this. Is it linguistically possible to use they, them? It seems to me the answer is yes, although we can talk about it. And second, what are the deeper ramifications for doing so? In other words, when you start to go along with they, them, or to me, the more higher stakes, going with he, him for someone that was born female, or going with she, her for someone that was born male, what are the deeper societal implications? So obviously you've thought a lot about this. That incident, I think, happened, 6 years ago?
That was 18.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more deeply about, because to me the linguistics question is pretty clear. You can use they, them. And it kind of works. It's awkward, but in English at least.
You get the hang of it.
You get the hang of it.
Yeah.
But that, to me, it's the much more profound question is what's at stake in doing that? How do you think about it?
See, you're going a place where I don't have anything glib to say yet, which is
Well, it doesn't need to be glib.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of a long-form podcast.
It's tough, though, because they, them is about, we're not going to look at whether I'm a boy or a girl. We're just going to go, And in many languages, that's the way it is by default anyway. That is a way of being a language. And so that's one thing, and that's hard. Calling someone who went through male puberty she is much more dislocating, I think, to all of us, or at least to all of us, but a certain very few, because you do seem to be getting into an issue of what is versus what isn't, and the extent to which you feel that it's healthy, appropriate, wise to go along. And I'm still working on that. The whole issue of what is a man, what is a woman, what is a trend, what is permanent, that's harder. And so, for example, in Pronoun Trouble, I don't go there because I think it's just too early, and I didn't want to write about something that creates so much anger, so much confusion. There are times when you want to see what the trend is. They and them, I think, were kind of post. It's rather clear that it's not going to go away. It's not a trend, that it's something that people are going to keep asking and wanting. And it seems to me it's an easily negotiated request because you're being asked to just not look at whether somebody is one gender or another, rather than being asked to refer to them as something which in your basal cognition you feel like they aren't. That's a tougher one. And
so is they, them kind of an elegant end-run solution around the knotty question of preferred gendered pronouns?
Yeah, because it means that you're not making a decision at all. You're not asking to be called something that might confuse someone, or at least no more than they, them does. And the truth is, maybe it would be easier if we had, I'm going to make something up, glish, that's a pronoun. And that would be neither he nor she.
But people have done
glish.
that. They've
and
done zir and here. And
yeah.
I mean, there's been zillions, like from places like Colombia.
And they just can't catch on because it's not a word, it's a pronoun. It's the nails, it's the screws, it's your fingernails. You can't change it. And so you can't bring in glish. And so it has to be something that we already have. The best one of them was heesh. Wouldn't it be great if we could have he and she be heesh? But no, it's not a pronoun because it's something somebody made up and you can't just make it up. And so you need something that we have. I, you, he, she, and it would make no sense, including it. So they is just the only one that works. Yeah, it's a messy compromise because we don't have enough pronouns to play with, but we can only work with what we have.
I've been wanting to ask you since I read this book about the line between politeness and coerced speech. Because to me, woke racism, or let's just say wokeness, because I don't think this is racist, but wokeness, a huge part of the way that it functioned and the way that it got people to go along with it was in punishing them for small linguistic crimes that were not actually crimes. Using the wrong pronoun for somebody, using a word that was out of date. I mean, we both can think of, or even frankly saying, all lives matter. That was unbelievable.
And you get fired, right?
People lost their jobs for this.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember this woman, I don't know why, there's certain examples that stick in all of our minds.
Leslie Boylan.
Leslie Boylan was one, but for me, it's this woman, Tiffany Riley, who was a principal in Vermont. And I think she said either all lives matter or she said Black Lives Matter, but also all lives matter, something like that. And she was like run out of town. So I think when a lot of
angry now.
Right. And it's like nothing, like it's incredible because now all of this stuff is being memory holed, and you have Gavin Newsom on a podcast claiming he never used Latinx. And it's like, wait, let me go to the Google machine and pull up all of the times you used Latinx yourself.
Exactly.
But in any case, how have you, like, we've just now lived through a decade where the battle for, the political battles were really taking place on your playing field, which is the playing field of language, and coercing people to use proper language. And how do you, like, is there a John McWhorter litmus test for when something is polite or a white lie? In the same way, if someone asks you, do I look fat? You say no, because why would you want to upset them, versus when it tips into coercion? And how do we know?
Well, I would say that when someone is called out for what is obviously an attempt to be humanistic and sympathetic to all people, when that is laboriously interpreted as a slur. So, for example, when somebody says, I don't see nothing, and then somebody says to you, well, that means that you must see something. That's a mind trick. In the same way, to be told that you're saying the wrong thing for saying all lives matter within the context of Black Lives Matter, that's a party trick. You're enjoying being mean in a case like that. Or in a case where someone says something.
Wait, you're saying all lives matter, you're enjoying being mean.
If you castigate someone for saying all lives matter in, say, 2020 or 2021, out of the idea that what we're supposed to be saying is Black Lives Matter and how dare you put Black lives below other lives, it's a party trick. You're making something up. It's a laborious interpretation that you're only leveling because we human beings can sometimes enjoy hurting each other. And that's what a lot of 2020 and 2021 was. Or in the case of somebody using fluent speech or even, fluently tweeting, probably late at night, and saying something that is clearly meant as a compliment and is not meant hurtfully and is only laboriously interpreted as hurtful. So I think of Jeffrey Lieberman, who was a psychologist at Columbia Presbyterian, who had his entire life flushed away with one comment about a dark-skinned African model being so beautiful that she's a freak of nature. Whole bunch of people came down upon him saying that to call a Black woman a freak is wrong because of Black women and associations with sexuality, etc. No, he deserved to maybe be told that wasn't ideal, and then he should have been able to go on with his life. But a lot of these things happening basically on Zoom, I think that was why a lot of these things happen. That, to me, does not pass the litmus test. He didn't deserve that. It's obvious that he was just trying to say something nice and human about this woman's appearance. You don't deserve to lose your job. And so that, I would say, that's my messy answer to that question.
So you know it when you see it.
Now, it's not the Potter Stewart. Of course, there's going to be a hazy line there. There are going to be some judgment calls. But in general, my sense is where the charge is so laborious that you have to work to understand it, something's wrong. We have better things to do.
Let me give you a scenario.
Okay.
My producer on this show, she's very into yoga, and she was at a yoga teacher training. And in the prenatal session, students were encouraged to say sperm donor instead of dad, and womb haver instead of mom. This is a real thing. I think people think that these are like always these fake examples, but it actually comes up more than you would think in—
It's real life.
Right. What do you think about that? Right? So it's— right, let's just steel man the position. They're trying to do that because mom and dad are too gendered, or perhaps they're thinking of parents like me, where there's not a dad in the picture. And they're basically taking the sensitivities— They're building a whole new set of norms around the incredibly small minority of people for whom saying mom and dad might make them feel excluded, right? So they're doing it in the name of inclusion, and they're forcing a new norm on people that winds up, in my mind, dehumanizing the majority. What dad wants to be called a sperm donor, right? So too far?
Too far. Those monikers don't work because a vast majority of people find them dehumanizing and insulting. A small minority of perhaps clever and, frankly, if you ask me, somewhat eccentric people find those terms useful because of agendas of their own. But it doesn't work in the polity. And so, for example, so many women are insulted by being referred to as womb havers or all of these other terms that are about anatomy as if that's what a woman is. I personally would not want to be referred to as a sperm giver, and I'm sure most men I know wouldn't. You don't want to focus on that particular thing as what you're called. And for example, I doubt if there is a single language in the world. I'm gonna lay my money down on this. There's 7,000. I, of course, have not examined all of them. But there is no language in the world where naturally men are called the spermos or something like that. It's always going to be some word for man, and there's no such thing as woman. Literally, I'll bet there's no such thing as woman being uterus with legs or something like that. It's always a word that just means woman. So, no. I think a small, vocal, and threatening minority is trying to have their way. And we're used to thinking of that, or at least many of us are used to thinking of that as Pete Hegseth. It's something that comes from the right. In 2020 and 2021, that was coming from the left. These people were punitive. And so, no, I think that one's pretty easy. Nobody wants to be referred to by their anatomy. And they're asking us to get used to being referred to by our anatomy, but there's no reason why. So they, them, we're being asked to get used to it.
But I think that there is a reason why. I think the reason why is because if you get people to go along with linguistic changes, right? Or I'll make an even more stark example. The reason I think J.K. Rowling decided to die on the hill that she died on, gender and gender trouble and pronoun trouble, is because she is a writer who cares about language. And I don't know this. This is just my speculation.
I guess, right.
And the reason that it's so significant to get someone to say a man can be a woman is because if you get them to say that, you can kind of get them to go along with anything. And so by getting them to change to, in that case, deny biological reality, deny something that goes against the most basic kind of common sense, where in getting people to go along with that en masse and to police other people that don't, that is an incredibly powerful political move.
What else do you think they would want to do once they had gotten that enforced, though, is the question. So you're saying that these people
I'm just saying so many other things did flow from it. Once you're able to get someone to say a man can become a woman, well then a person that went through male puberty can be on the women's team and take the gold medals. A person with a penis, namely a man, can be in a women's prison. I mean, we saw already the downstream effects just in that one, for lack of a better term, skew. Sorry, my mind is on merchandise this morning. But
got it.
So do you agree with that? Did you see it as part of a much bigger political project? Or just kind of like a fun word game that people were playing that got out of hand?
I see it as all having happened together rather than changing the words coming first. But I get what you mean, because once in the late teens, I started writing quietly favorable things about the new they. I started hearing from some people, always people left of center, always women for whatever it's worth, maybe that wasn't relevant, really alarmed that I was favoring that, because they were saying in the wake of this comes surgery and bathrooms and sports, etc. And my sense of it was those things are happening right now at the same time. I'm not sure if the words are a way of getting those things in. It seems that there's a way of thinking where various assumptions are being questioned and that we're being pushed to agree with various things all at a time. I'd have to work to think whether it starts with calling a woman a man, and next thing you know, you have Leah Thomas. I thought of it all as happening at one time. And
you didn't see it as a political project.
All of that is a political project, but the language was just one of many things involved in it. I didn't sense that if we can get you to say that this man is a woman, then you will accept these other things. It all seemed to me to be one thing.
I think it was a way, there were other tests, right? So Latinx became a test, or using the main bedroom instead of the master bedroom became a test, or using workforce instead of manpower, or undocumented instead of alien. They were all ways.
Workforce? Oh, is that one now too?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that one.
Oh, there are zillions.
Okay,
There's
yeah.
zillions. But, and Thomas Chatterton Williams has written about a lot of them in a himself, which is great, and people should go and check that out. My point is only, it was a way, it was not a loyalty oath. In other words, I am signing up for the Communist Party. But in a way, it was a kind of soft loyalty oath to get people to go along with radically new set of words, the list of which just seemed to be added onto by the day. And I think the pronouns were like the core of it, because unlike, let's say, I mean, some of these changes I think were good, right? I think about, and I think it's changed, you were talking before about the way using a different phrase can change the way you think about something.
Workforce is better than manpower.
Enslaved person is better than slave.
Yeah, I actually have found myself using it because it's easy to think slaveness is inherent to a person. Yeah, enslaved
It's like
person.
you're putting a person, like you're putting the human being back into that category. So I think
can help change thought.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think for enslaved person instead of slave has, I think, been a good one. So some of these are good. But the pronoun one, I think the reason that so many women especially are coming to you about it is because I think what's at stake in the pronoun is something profound about our humanity. And frankly, our femaleness.
I think also the pronouns stand out because you use them so much. And so, for example, for most of us, how often do we say Latinx anyway? Whereas with the they, them, you are sitting across from someone and you might have to use it 50 times in an exchange. And so that's another reason that it seems so prominent. I see what you mean, the idea that it can be symbolic of all of the rest of it. It seemed to me that all of these issues came up so much at the same time that I had a hard time seeing the language as the spur, despite that I'm a language person, maybe partly because I'm always skeptical that language changes thought significantly anyway, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't at all. And so, yeah, all of this is certainly, you can see all of this as part of the same thing. I would say that the they, them is probably, it should be the least controversial part. You know, in terms of penises in the bathroom, et cetera, I think controversy should continue about that. But they, them, it seems to me that when the dust clears, if there are people who can be confidently called they, them if they choose, I don't see anything wrong with that. Now, I guess many people would say there's always going to be that slippery slope. You can't have they, them without the other things.
Exactly.
Maybe I have too much imagination, which is rare because that's my sci-fi imagination going.
I think the other side of the argument, just to take it, would be, hold on, John McWhorter. If we go along with they, them, it's not just a slippery slope. We know what follows. What follows, and I'll just take the most high stakes part of the argument, what follows in a world where they, them becomes normative is a universe of children who feel, not all the children, obviously, but a group of people who think that things that should be settled and should not be a fraught or chaotic part of their identity formation, namely their sex or their gender, becomes fraught and becomes something that's sort of up for grabs and chaotic in a way that it ought not to be. And inevitably, you know, let's just call it non-binary, leads to a world of social transition, which inevitably leads, and there's a lot of, there's good scientific data to back that up, literal transition and surgeries and medicalization. And I'm making the argument overly crude and hyperbolic just to take you there, right? That's what they'll say. They'll say, you're saying that they is an elegant end run, but in fact, it's just a gateway drug to these other things that you, John McWhorter, I think would have trouble with. What do you say to them?
I don't talk about these things officially yet, but it's clear to me that that's going to have to stop given the position that I'm in. So I'm going to say carefully. I sense that they alone could gracefully exist without the slippery slope toward other things, partly because things are changing since 2020 and 2021 with they, or even since, say, 2018. Increasingly from what I'm seeing, and I've been on sabbatical all year, so I'm not on campus every day.
What a perfect time to be on sabbatical, by the way. Jesus.
I don't know who planned this. I don't have to go.
Wow.
I don't have to go to any meetings.
Wow.
And so your whole year, and that means that I don't hear the kids the way I usually do every day. But they is giving way, I think, to people who can go either way. So very often it's she/they or he/they, and the person doesn't mind if you refer to them as he or she. And so
it's pronoun bisexuality.
Yeah, and that's a fashion, or it might settle in and become the norm, which is fine with me. Barry, frankly, with the other things, I hesitate to say anything about these things yet because I haven't really thought them through. But in terms
It's 2025. You could say anything.
In terms of the prevalence of the surgeries, like the uptick in all of that, I think especially with how quickly things get around on social media, the downside of that, including people who end up regretting it, is going to be so clear that what we see now is not going to be a permanent condition. I think it's too obvious that decision, oh, come on, John, just say it. That decision is now being made too easily by too many parents and kids. I think that's painfully clear. And I think that we will be able to see this. Now, in 1975, it would have taken longer. Now all you have to do is open up your phone. And I think that that's also true. I'm going to catch it for this, but it's what I think. When have I stopped? All of a sudden, I'm getting timid. It's because I'm getting old.
You're at the Free Press, John.
The idea of somebody who's gone through male puberty competing against women in sports, I think most people can see that's not right. And as more and more women end up bested in situations like that, that's going to turn out to have been a fashion of our times. But the they, them, I think can settle in and just stay because it doesn't hurt anybody.
Okay, let's tease out if it hurts anybody. I think...
Like you're worried about a kid.
Well, no, I'm thinking through whether they, them, A, will stick around, and B, I'm trying to untangle it in the way that you seem to have no trouble doing. Because to me, it's been attendant to this broader frenzy around coerced language that has, to me, felt so oppressive. And frankly, I'm thrilled. I mean, now it's being replaced by other things, which we will talk about. But it's refreshing to me and surprising to me that you see it as a separate phenomenon, because I think a lot of people will be like, wait, that John McWhorter is arguing in favor of they, them? They, them has been at the core of a linguistic movement that he has been, and a political movement that he has been so opposed to. Help us understand, John McWhorter, how we can untangle it.
He is... Why am I referring to myself in the third person?
They is. Yeah.
I am a nerd at heart. What you're getting at is that social commentary is something that I kind of fell into 25 years ago, and I figured, okay, I guess I have to do this. But the real...
Don't sound so enthusiastic.
And that means people hating you, et cetera, and it's great in many other ways. But at heart, I'm always somebody who's teaching myself languages for no reason, learning about languages around the world. Just this morning, I was reading about they have to slaughter dolphins on this island in the Solomon Islands. And I was reading about that, and the first thing I thought, one paragraph in, was what's the language and what it's like? And then they mentioned the language, and I look it up. Oh, okay. And so that's me. And so for me, they, them, my first thought was, oh, so now we get to have a gender-neutral pronoun like so many languages do. So now we get to be like Chinese. I understand that won't work, that there are larger issues here that the they, them is connected with. But for me, first, it was just the language is changing, which to me is always interesting. I have to be more holistic about it. I do understand that. Now, I'll give you this. It's too early to say. It's really too early to say. But I've been writing about they, them as if it's permanent. And in Pronoun Trouble, I assume that it's with us forever. I'm not exactly sure in 2025. I wrote Pronoun Trouble in 2023, which was, a while ago now. And here in 2025, I wonder if in movies in the 2050s, people saying they is going to be a sign of these crazy 2020s. I don't know if it's going to stay, because since 2020, I have seen a lot of people in between, say, 10 and 20, eagerly embracing they, and me eagerly trying to use it and messing up. That's me writing Pronoun Trouble, who then kind of let it go as they got a little older. Neither of my daughters have embraced it, and they're both people who love other people, love other kids. They are brilliant, of course, but they are not nerds, and yet neither one of them seems to be interested in they. And so maybe it's just been a trend, and maybe as society grapples with the Leah Thomas issue, the penis in the bathroom issue, maybe they, them will flake away with it. Maybe.
But you don't think so?
I hope not, because I like the idea of Mandarin calls everybody ta, he, she, and it. Now we've got a ta. I wish it could be like that, but if it isn't, then we'll just go on using he and she.
Well, the book is coming out at a funny time.
Yes, it is.
Because just as you're making an argument in favor of the normalization of they, them, Democrats are pretending like they've never heard those words before. I remember in the few days after the election when AOC took her pronouns out of her bio, and I felt like an era had ended. What is it like to be putting out your argument into this political context?
Honestly, Barry, the way I do these books is that I write an angry one, and then I write a happy one so that I'll feel better.
So woke racism is
the angry one. And then like 400 years ago, this was, back before there was print, I wrote a book called Losing the Race. It was 2000. It was an angry book about race. It was one of these things where somebody had to say it, and I did. After that, I thought, I want the next book to be happy. And so I wrote Power of Babel, which was like me and my happy languages. Woke racism, I wrote furious. And I thought, well, that was unpleasant. And now I want to write about something fun, like all of our pronouns. And then this happens. I had no idea that I was going to be jumping into penises in the bathroom. I thought I was just writing about they and them and the kid flying a kite, calling themselves they. So here we are. And, frankly, maybe it makes it all more interesting that it's not just about grammar. But this is not what I was expecting at all. It's going to be a delicious challenge, or as Bork said, an intellectual feast to unite these pronouns with all of these current issues.
Do you ever use they, them for yourself?
No. I'm a he. Always.
Always.
I am not a they, them. They is, I told them. You don't, do you? Or do you?
Them?
Yeah, for yourself.
Them? Wow, we're in like I'm a she, her.
Yes, exactly.
Always been a she, her. Gonna die a she, her.
I've also never written my pronouns. I mean, I guess I would if somebody held a toy gun to my head, but I've never put it. It's rather clear. And actually, one thing that I say in the book, and I don't know how this is going to go, why do you have to give all the forms of the pronoun? Like, why can't you just say he as opposed to he, him,
You tell
his?
me.
Like, who would want it to be he, her? It's basically you're only going to want one thing unless it's he, they. And so one thing I say is we could shorten it, just she, if that's what it is, or they. It doesn't be they, them. Who would want they, but then if you use the object form, call her, her. Nobody would want that. So there's that. But no, I've never given, I use the excuse that I'm too old, but I'm not that old. But no, I'm he, and whoever sees it knows it probably, and if they don't, let's get past it.
That's the thing. Whoever sees you kind of knows, right?
Yeah.
And the purpose is, just to, I cards on the table, not surprisingly, I found the use of pronouns and the coerced use of declaring your pronouns and putting them in your email signature, which I never would do. I would never do that. Annoyed the crap out of me, to say the least. That's my view. But if I'm trying to steelman the other perspective, the reason for it was, again, for a vanishingly small minority, but a minority nonetheless of people for whom it was not clear by looking at them what pronouns they would prefer.
Sure.
Do you think it is a good or a bad cultural norm to have that kind of thing, to continue on with the preferred declared pronouns in places like our email signatures? Something you want to continue and embrace, or something we should leave behind?
We signal what kinds of people we are in various, almost subconscious ways all the time, in terms of what clothes we wear, in terms of what car we drive. I remember, people would, when people first started getting vaccinated, at least in my neighborhood, and they stopped masking starting in about May, June of 21. Often they wore caps saying, "I'm not a Republican," just because they wanted that to be clear. And so using the pronouns now is a way of showing that you're on board with more fluid conceptions of gender. I don't see any harm in that. I would see harm if we were forced to do it. If somebody told me that at Columbia my email has to say he, him, I would resist. But, no one has told me that. Maybe the pronouns will be a fashion of 2020 and people will giggle, watching that movie in 2050 and somebody has that in their email. Or maybe it'll just be something permanent. I don't see that it hurts. Although, yes, of course, the vast majority of people, it's obvious what they are from their appearance, and they probably don't think very much about being neither one nor the other. Although, Barry, there is something else, and I only know about this so much. People under 25 claiming that one is bi is much more common than I was aware represents biological reality, to put that carefully. Like bisexual, I went to college, I live in New York City.
Oh, everyone's bisexual
but now everybody's
But the incentives are clear.
Right. It's a signaling, right, that you are an evolved person.
I think it's two things. I think there were in Silicon Valley, for example, it was like a joke because there was new rules set in place. I'm telling the story in a sweeping way, where you needed to have gender, sexual, racial diversity on boards. And it was like the joke was all of a sudden every straight male is bisexual overnight. So I think part of it was literally the incentive structure in that instance to fulfill diversity. Okay. But among a Columbia boy, what you could imagine is to be cool, right? Because being queer, gay, bisexual in some way, it's a low stakes way of doing it, right? If you're a straight boy, you don't want to be gay, but being bi is just a way of saying you have the right politics, to be blunt.
I cannot help sensing that is going on. Yes, given
that is definitely what's going on.
How common saying that you're bisexual has become. And so, it doesn't now. Is that wrong, however? This person who's 20 saying, "Oh, I'm bi," who's probably never going to have a same-sex relationship, but they say that now. It's
stolen valor from the gays.
From actual.
I mean,
I can imagine how that would feel. Yeah, I'm taking these things in. It's all happening very quickly. But if it is fashionable to explore, even if only mentally, the idea that you are bi, then that'll be reflected in giving your pronouns as well. You are hip to the gospel, and you're just showing that. We all dress thinking of that. I'm sitting here wearing a cardigan, and I'm not wearing it in irony. I'm wearing it because I'm 59, and modernity frightens me sometimes, and I like musicals and books about old things. I'm signaling that I am that. Well, he, they is a different kind of signaling. I don't think my cardigan hurts anything. I hope it doesn't. And so pronouns too, right?
I don't think I'm overstating it to say that they, them was like a critical part of Donald Trump's win. And what do I mean by that? First of all, the trans issue and the way that the ideology around it mobilized a lot of, we used to call them soccer moms. Maybe now we'd call them COVID lockdown moms who were just activated around this issue. Mm-hmm. But there was an ad, I think it was, putting the politics of it aside, the most brilliant ad of the political campaign. And I think it was Kamala's for they, them, Donald Trump is for you.
That was damn good in itself.
Right. So there's a way in which this conversation is like, like being in the mind of John McWhorter is always like a fun word game, word play. It's a conversation about linguistics separate from politics, but there are serious political ramifications to the they, them. And I wonder if you've thought about them, because for a person in another part of the country, listening to this conversation, thinking, what the hell are these people talking about? Like, I live in a world where there are she, hers, and he, hims, and I've never even thought about a thing like a preferred pronoun. And these people are out of touch elites who are like busying themselves with tertiary issues that have nothing to do with life and the stuff of life and making the country better. And that was something that Donald Trump, frankly, took incredible advantage of in that ad. So how do you think about if you do, and maybe the answer is you don't, the political ramifications of the they-themification of our language?
Of our language, I'm not so worried, for the same reason that I'm not worried about Latinx. And so, for example, Latinx is a failure in terms of something that most people are ever going to use. I live in a heavily Latino neighborhood. I've never heard it used once by any Latino person of any social class. And that's not going to change. However, it's going to be used by a certain cadre of activists and artists. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's their cardigans. That's their way of showing that they're part of that setting. And so let's say that they, them holds on, but it's only among us elites. Now, I'm not sure. I'm genuinely not sure whether they, them is absent in that small town in Ohio that's seen the factories move away and they're trying to figure out what to do. I'm not sure. I don't spend time in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. But in my world, let's say that it holds on. The question is whether or not in my world, the people who don't use it are told that they're bad people if they don't. Are they being beaten over the head with Latinx? Are they being beaten over the head with they, them? If Elizabeth Warren wants to say Latinx in itself, that's fine. However, if her people are telling others, the out there America that we talk about, real Americans, some people say, that you're wrong if you don't use it too, that's an issue. I'm not sure if that's necessarily what's going to happen, though. If you don't use they, them, you're primitive. You're wrong, as opposed to we use they, them. Now, if the Democratic Party is perceived as a group of people who do that among themselves and are concerned with that and not with issues involving most people, that's a problem. But,
you could imagine a world where it's not red and blue America, but it's they, them America and him and her America.
I find that very easy to imagine. And as long as they, them isn't seen as something that makes you look down on him and her, and I don't necessarily think that it would be. There would be people out in the him, her America saying, oh, you mean these people who say they, them, and it would be seen as kind of a strange affectation. But I don't know if they would feel put down about it. There are class differences. There are regional differences. There are political differences. I don't think we're ever going to get past that. The question is just how we feel about the differences. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think if there's one big theme in the area of language over the past 10 years, it was trying to make language as exquisitely sensitive as possible, right? We were talking about that before. No more master bedroom. We could go down the list. One of the things that's been giving me a lot of whiplash over the past, I think Trump has been in office 3 months, is the way that words that had previously been stigmatized are now roaring back. So using retarded as an adjective, calling people gay, and not in the fun way that gays call each other gay. But
lame, right.
Yeah, you're a loser.
Right.
And then a lot of other things that I won't even mention. How do you think about that? How have you been observing that?
Yes. I hadn't seen the public use of the word retarded in God knows how long until, who said it? Hegseth?
I don't remember.
Somebody of that crowd. There's going to be a coarsening. To tell you the truth, Barry, though, when you tell people not to say things, it only makes saying that thing more powerful. And so, anybody, who can see this or knows who I am knows that I'm thinking of the N-word. I think that the way we police it now is such that it only gives it more power, as opposed to the way we were policing it, say, 25 or 30 years ago. But the new idea that you can't even discuss it, that I can't say it here, whereas 30 years ago, in the equivalent to this, you could easily say it if you were just referring to it. That doesn't work. And so, to tell you the truth, to go crazy if somebody uses a horrible word like retarded, that's not a word I would use. To shout too loudly about it only gives the next person more power when they decide they're going to say it too. And so language can only be so sensitive. And of course, there are going to be sensitivities. There is no language where politeness plays no part in it, no language in the world. But one can overdo it and get to the point that calling out the impolitenesses becomes a recreational way of feeling good about yourself and basically giving vent to a certain bloodlust that is part of being a human being. And that worries me.
Donald Trump campaigned on the idea that wrong speak was over. He said, I have stopped all government censorship and brought back free speech in America. And then he started scrubbing words like equity and non-binary and anti-racist and things like that from federal websites, some of which I cheer. One of the things I do not is that Jackie Robinson's page, I don't know if you know this, baseball season starts tomorrow, was scrubbed.
Too diverse. Right.
Yeah, was scrubbed from the Air Force website because it described his anti-segregation protests. And then, of course, there's the Gulf of Mexico becoming the Gulf of America, which I have to say I think is very funny, or renaming Denali in Alaska back to Mount McKinley. How do you think about all of this? Is this just our future forever where one group of people wins the White House, changes the language, the other group changes the language back? And is this unique, or has it always been this way?
No, it has not always been this way. And basically, this starts with a certain group of people on the hard left who are teaching us a religious tenet, which is that battling the power of whiteness must center all endeavor. That's clearly insane, and there's been a useful backlash against that. The backlash, however, is excessive when it becomes that we're going to allow free speech except when it comes to all of these words that can be connected to battling power differentials, and we're going to go after every single word and every single concept. To be so obsessed with that, even from the other side, is crazy as well. Aren't there other things that you might be concerned with, such as not bringing Jeff Goldberg into a call on a public platform about you're about to, attack the Houthis in Yemen, et cetera? There are larger issues that we need to be thinking about, as opposed to whether it is spiky or nervy to discuss Jackie Robinson's desegregation effort. So it's too much in the other direction. On this same topic, shall we battle whiteness as the center of all endeavor? And the answer is no. That can be one of many things, but not that. But then to focus on that to this extent, in this ham-fisted way, is an equal waste of time.
One of the things that I've been wanting to ask you about is this thing that is being described as the woke right. So if we had the woke left, which you write about so powerfully in your book, Woke Racism, now we have a liberal right that is adopting a lot of the same tools as the woke left. Do you believe there is such a thing as the woke right?
Yeah, we have to allow how language changes. And so the right is certainly not woke to the same things that the woke left has been. And what we mean by woke right is that this right is as recreationally punitive and prosecutorial as the woke left was. And so meanings narrow. Woke used to mean awake to certain issues of leftist wisdom, and then it becomes people who are mean about policing for their political sentiments. Same thing from the right. And yes, we're seeing, for example, in woke racism, one reason, I should stop saying this about my book because then nobody's going to want to read it anymore, but it's becoming a little obsolete in that I kind of poo-poo what we now call the woke right. I say, yes, there's a liberalism on the right. It does not worry me as much as a liberalism from the left. That's somebody writing on a sun porch in 2020. I would not
that they weren't in power.
Now. They weren't in power, yeah. And at the time I say, what effect do they seem to be having on how the nation is run? Well, now look what's going on in 2025. So yeah, it's very much an issue, and new things need to be said. Who knew that this was where we were going to be 5 years ago?
The place where we began this conversation was sort of, the cover of your new book is purple. I think of you as a purple person in that you are not easily categorizable as red or blue. You're politically independent, which means I think that puts you in a really important position as a cultural observer and commentator, because you're not standing inside of the tribe kind of ever. You're always standing a little bit orthogonal to it, a little bit outside of it. And so I'm wondering, as someone who has felt, as you've described yourself, really angry and really concerned about the direction we were heading in culturally, as a result of, let's call it not woke anymore, let's call it illiberalism from the left. How worried are you about or liberalism from the right and the direction of our culture right now?
I worry about illiberalism from the left because it continues, especially in academia and the arts. Academia and the arts is only one part of this great, wonderful world, but nevertheless, it is strangling creativity and sometimes even intelligence in too many fields. And so the Great Awakening is over. Wokeness from the left doesn't have the power that it had 5 years ago, but it does hold on there. And I think, if I may, we certainly see its operations in how people often process the Gaza war. The illiberalism from the right
Do you want to say 2 more sentences about that, just so people know what you mean?
Sure. And of course, it's one thing to say that the Great Awakening is over, but then to see what's gone on our campuses, for example, and the utter intolerance of alternate views from people who are against Israel's actions in Gaza and often, therefore, against Israel's existence. The intransigence, the impossibility of conversation of any kind, that's very 2020. And so to say woke is gone sometimes feels like what we really mean is just that it's retracted a little bit but changed its locations. From the right, it's frightening because we have an administration in power run by someone who has no business in the office and has hired a clown car of a cabinet to help him not run the country. And so there's actual power. There's actual power. There are actual funding policies. There are actual people being disappeared practically based on this kind of thought, which is not something that I had expected before. Some of these things, many people would say, are more concrete dangers than anything going on in the arts or somebody's protesting and in what way about, the war in Gaza. The illiberalism from both sides is very frightening to me. I wouldn't write about it only from the left now. That would be shrill. It would have to be about what's going on from both sides. But what you're seeing is too many Americans who are incapable of talking to one another, incapable of seeing the other side. And, we've all said it a million times about the bubbles that people are in. But it's a problem. It's a problem when people can't have a coherent conversation. And that's what we're seeing.
Well, John McWhorter, perhaps your next angry book will be about the woke right, but for now, your happy book is called
Pronoun Trouble, the story of us in 7 little words.
You can get it anywhere you get books. John McWhorter, thank you so much for coming on Honestly.
Barry, this has been a delight.